Good afternoon, and welcome to our weekly Torah Insight and Story. We have two different aspects of the Parsha that relate to the deafness and blindness, how they are positive. Not, God forbid, that a person should be blind or deaf, and we should wish that on anyone. But sometimes we have to be deaf not to listen to different voices, and sometimes we have to be blind to not look at things literally and figuratively. What am I referring to? Jacob was now being transported from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, to be buried in the cave of Machpelah in Israel. And our sages tell us that something happened. There was a hitch. As they were ready to bury Jacob, Jacob's brother Esav appears at the scene and starts to protest that it's not fair, because the cave of Machpelah had 4 crypts, double crypts. In one, Adam and Eve were buried. Another one, Abraham and Sarah. A third one was Isaac and Rebekah. And the fourth one was the place where Jacob buried his wife Leah. And now they were going to bury Jacob in the other vacant crypt. And Esav protested. He says, no, it's not fair. I should have the other burial place. But the counter-argument was that you sold it. And he said, prove it. And they had a document, but the document was left in Egypt. So they asked Naphtali, one of the 12 tribes, who was known for his speed, to run back to Egypt and bring the document. Meanwhile, Jacob had a grandson whose name was Chushim. He was the son of Dun. Chushim was deaf, and he just doesn't understand what's going on. He can't hear what people are saying. So he was like saying, "What is going on? It's not dignified to leave Jacob's body in the open and not proceeding with a burial." Somehow they communicated to him. Maybe they used sign language, maybe they wrote it down, or maybe they just pointed to Esav, your uncle, Esav, he's the problem. He's stopping this whole process. And Chushim got very upset, and he clubbed Esav and decapitated him. And Esav's head rolled into the cave of Machpelah and ended up in Isaac's bosom. Sometimes, I heard this from Rabbi Y. Jacobson, a famous Chabad speaker. Sometimes we have to be deaf. Sometimes we cannot listen to the other side. Generally speaking, Judaism always counsels listening to both sides. Whenever there's a court case, a Jewish judge, has an obligation to hear both sides. He can't just hear one side and then decide the case. You know, they tell the story of this rabbi whose wife was listening to the proceedings, and he listens to one side of the case and he says, "You're 100% right." Then he listens to the other side of the case, says, "You're 100% right." And the wife pipes in and she says, "How could they both be right?" And he says, "You're also 100% right." A rabbi, a judge, a teacher, a parent has to always listen to both sides to be able to give a fair judgment. That's the general ruling. But sometimes there are no two sides. When someone comes to you and undermines your very right to exist, you don't have to listen to that side. You don't have to listen to their arguments. It's not just that you disagree with them and you will debate them. There's no room for debate. And this is very relevant to what's going on today when we're hearing the media present two sides. there's the side of Israel and there's the side of the so-called Palestinians. No, there are no two sides over here. Jews have a right to exist, and we don't have to debate whether we have a right to exist or to what extent we have a right to exist. And sometimes we allow the other side to enter into our own consciousness and to weaken our resolve and to feel that maybe our case is not 100% airtight. Maybe we're doing something that we shouldn't be doing. We should stop second guessing ourselves, because we have obviously the God-given right more than any other nation on earth to any land. As the Rabbi once explained, that let's take France. The French people live in France. No one says that it's guaranteed that France has to always be a home for French people. A time could come when some other country conquers France and drives all the French people out and repopulates it with some other nationality, some another ethnicity, and it's no longer the French land. They have no guaranteed right. No country has a guaranteed right. In fact, if you go throughout the world, you'll see that most, if not all, countries of the world were conquered by other countries. And there were periods in history when the conquering country would drive everyone out, drive out the indigenous people, and repopulate it with people from another country. That's what happened with the Assyrian Empire. That's why we have the Samaritans. They came from another region east of Israel, and when the Assyrian king drove the 10 tribes out into exile, he repopulated it with the Samaritans, who were always a source of a lot of friction between them and the Jewish people, but that's a separate subject. So no country in the world has, no nationality in the world has a guaranteed ironclad connection to any country in which they live, even if they lived there for thousands of years. There's one exception to that rule. The Jewish people's relationship with Israel is ironclad. It's something that was created at the time of creation. God created the land of Israel as the land for the Jewish people. As I mentioned many times, the Midrash uses the analogy, a coat that is tailor-made, a suit tailor-made for someone. It won't fit anyone else. It only fits that person for whom it was tailor-made. Israel was tailor-made for the Jewish people. Whether the Jewish people had a right to conquer the land when we were still in exile. You often hear people who are anti-Zionists to say, no, we had no right to take it before Mashiach. That may be true. That's based on passages in the Talmud. But it's not that we took someone else's land. We took our land. And once it's our land, that's something that can never be changed. And we can never allow ourselves to listen to the arguments from the other side and never justify any other arguments. That's the deafness. There's also blindness in another sense. Joseph is being blessed among his other brothers by his father Jacob and his deathbed. And what does Jacob say about Joseph? He says, a charming son is Joseph, a charming son to the eye. Each of the daughters climbed heights to gaze. The girls in Egypt wanted to see his beauty. As Rashi quotes, that they stood on the walls just to get a glimpse of Joseph's because he was so strikingly handsome. And Rashi, in another comment, adds something. First he says they wanted to look at his beauty, and then he says they wanted to look at him. But Joseph resisted looking back. Joseph was rewarded with the power of not being affected by ayin hara. Ayin hara is the evil eye. When a person looks at you with an eye of jealousy, it could harm the person who's being looked at. Joseph and his descendants, it says, were not affected, cannot be affected by that, because Joseph knew how to control his eyes. The Talmud tells a story of two sages who used to work as shoemakers, and they would make shoes for women, but the women would look at them, but they would not look back. They were able to control their eyes to not look at something that doesn't belong to them. Joseph was rewarded when he didn't resisted the charm of Potiphar's wife who tried to seduce him, he didn't return the gaze. Sometimes we have to be blind to, literally blind to things that we shouldn't be looking at that don't belong to us. But it also, in a broader sense, blindness means that we're not going to embrace the view, the perspectives of society. I mentioned this in another class, that we're looking at a world today that has such perverted sense of morality. You're an army of people who are defending the lives of every Jewish citizen. You have a right to defend yourself. That goes without saying. Do you have to risk the lives of the righteous soldiers who are risking their lives? Do you have to jeopardize their lives to save the civilians of your enemy? Civilians who, if even if they're innocent, the enemy is the one who is using them as human shields and killing them. Do we have to risk the lives of our soldiers to protect civilian life? Where does it say that a soldier's life of a righteous country, of a righteous cause, is less valuable than your enemy's civilian lives? That's a modern day perversion of morality and ethics. We have to be blind and not see things through the perspective of the secular world. You have a world, you have a UN consisting of close to 200 countries, and majority of them overwhelmingly vote against Israel. They don't vote against North Korea. They don't vote against Iran, the most two evil countries in the world. They don't vote against China, which does terrible things to its own people. Only Israel. So we see how skewed, how perverted their perspective is. And the Jewish people, they may be an isolated people. We're all alone in this regard, virtually all alone, because even America is not supporting Israel the way it should be supporting Israel. But yet, we have to be blind to their perspective, only see things through the prism of the Torah, through the prism of Judaism, through the prism of Jewish existence. The story that I want to tell, I think I might have told the story once before. I just heard it online from Rabbi Jacobson, but I heard it from others as well. The story is about a couple in Borough Park, very religious, Orthodox, Chassidic couple, that were not having a good time in their marriage, and the wife, who was dissatisfied, demanded a get. She wanted to be divorced, and somehow the husband refused to give the divorce, and there was back and forth, and finally when she saw that she's not getting what she wanted, she disappeared. And there was a rabbi from Sydney, Australia, Rabbi Pinchas Woolstone, I know this man, was visiting from Australia, and they found out that she had left and fled to Australia. Where in Australia they had no knowledge of. Somehow they got in touch with this Rabbi Woolstone, who had a type of a Chabad house in Sydney, Australia, and they said to him, "You're from Australia, maybe you could find my wife." And he said, "I want you to know, Australia is a big country. Geographically, it's the size of continental U.S. You can't just go and say, well, I'm in Australia, I'll find a girl missing from America." So he decided that he's going to ask the Rebbe what to do. So he goes to the Rebbe and he tells the Rebbe about the problem, that this woman disappeared and the family wants him to find this woman, and he doesn't know what to do. So the Rebbe says he should take a flight to Brisbane. Brisbane is a city north of Sydney, about another hour flight from Sydney. And he asked the Rebbe, what should he do in Brisbane? And the Rebbe didn't answer. Just go to Brisbane. So as a loyal chassid, the Rebbe tells you to do something, you don't question it, even if you don't understand how is his going to Brisbane going to help. So he gets on a flight. When he gets to Sydney, he gets on a flight to Brisbane. He's sitting down next to a very aristocratic-looking woman, dressed very handsomely, looked very noble features, and they strike up a conversation. It turns out that she was I think she had some type of religious role in some Christian denomination. I think it was Greek Orthodox, but she also owned a chain of stores of dresses, of women's clothing, different cities in Australia. And they strike up a conversation talking about theology. And at the end of the time that they were together, she says to the rabbi, "Can I ask you a question? Uh, how does Judaism view a person who left the fold and wants to come back? Will they be embraced? Will they be accepted? Or once they drop out, they're rejected and that's it?" And he said, "Oh, that's certainly our policy, that no Jew could be ever considered lost. And if a Jew drops out and they want to come back, we'll embrace them. There's no problem, absolutely no problem." And this woman shared with him that she knows a Jewish woman who works in one of her stores in a city called Cairns, Cairns, I believe. It's north of Brisbane. And apparently she dropped her Judaism and she ran away from her family. And I can tell that she's not happy. And I think she would want to come back. And then this Rabbi Woolstone shared with this woman the whole story, the why he's there in Australia, why he's going to Brisbane, and that how the Rebbe told him to go to Brisbane. And here he meets this woman who seems to have this woman who fled as an employee in one of her stores. He was now sure that this was what happened, and they make up a time to meet in Cairns. And to make a long story short, he visits this girl, in the store that she was working, but she was shocked when she sees this chassid coming into a place, Cairns, Australia, out of a place in the middle of nowhere. Most people in the world never heard of this place. And he told her that he would want to help her, and she says, "The only thing I want is a get, and if you can get me the get, the religious divorce, then there's something to talk about." And he promised her that he'll work on it. Sure enough, he makes a few phone calls, and she returns to America, and she gets the get from her husband. And she moves away to a faraway city, and she starts coming to the local Chabad house. And to make a long story shorter, she becomes observant again. She remarries, and she started a family, and she has six children. This is all from the Rebbe telling him to take a flight to Brisbane. The Rebbe prophetically knew, whether he knew that this was going to be how that he's going to find this woman, but he just had a prophetic insight and inspiration to tell him to go to Brisbane, and that's where he met this woman, to save this Jewish woman from being alienated from Judaism, and helping her come back to Judaism and to start her life all over again. Okay, everyone should have a good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. Sunday, 11 o'clock, we'll be having our last class in the series on Jewish practice. The topic will be Jewish dietary laws, Kashrut.